Hello, everyone. My name's John Radwan, and I direct the Institute for Communication and Religion here at Seton Hall University. We're an affiliate unit within the College of Human Development, Culture, and Media, and we regularly produce podcasts on religious traditions and their contributions to culture. Thank you for tuning in. Today, my guest is professor, journalist, and author Anthony DePalma. He's written a new book on education at Newark Abbey called On This Ground. Anthony, welcome to our ICR podcast.
John, it's great to be back at the hall.
I'm going to share your bio first, and then I'm going to ask some questions to help everyone learn about hardship and hope at the toughest prep school in America. Are you ready?
You got it.
Okay, here's your bio. Anthony DePalma spent 22 years as a reporter and foreign correspondent for the New York Times. He served as bureau chief in both Mexico and Canada. At the Times, he also was an international business correspondent covering the Americas, a national correspondent covering higher ed, and a metro reporter covering housing, the working class, and the environment. In 2001, he published his first book, Here, a biography of the new American continent. His second book, published in 2006, was The Man Who Invented Fidel, about the rise of Fidel Castro and the impact that Castro and journalism had on U.S.-Cuba relations. He left the Times in 2008 to become writer-in-residence here at Seton Hall University, a post that he held for several years. He continued writing while teaching his classes on international relations and journalism, and there he completed his third book, City of Dust, about the environmental and health crises that followed the 9/11 terrorist attacks. The book was the basis of a CNN documentary, Terror in the Dust, which won the Society of Professional Journalists Award for Best Documentary in 2011. In addition to Seton Hall teaching experience, he's also taught and continues to teach at Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism. He's been there since 2009. So Anthony's latest book, On This Ground, Hardship and Hope at the Toughest Prep School in America, will be released in just 2 weeks in February 2026 by William Morrow HarperCollins. So again, Anthony, welcome back to Seton Hall. Are you ready for some questions?
Shoot.
Okay. Let's start with some history. Please tell us about the origin of the Newark Abbey and how education has evolved there, especially with regard to religion.
Yeah. Thank you, John, and thank you for the invitation to be here and to share some of this story. And it's appropriate that we're here at Seton Hall to do this because the history of Seton Hall and the history of Newark Abbey are quite similar. Both the result of the same man, Bishop Roosevelt Bailey. So to go back, let's go back to the middle of the 19th century, earlier by a decade than that. And Newark is a small port city that's growing with immigrants, many of them at that time coming from Germany. And the Archdiocese of Newark was brand new. It had just started. One of the first parishes they started was St. Mary's in 1842 in what is today the Central Ward. And it was set up basically to serve the German Catholic immigrant families. They invited a Benedictine from New York to come over. He was a Benedictine from Bavaria, because they were the ones who set up the first Benedictine abbey in the New World in Pennsylvania, Latrobe, Pennsylvania, a couple of years before that in the early 1840s. So the request came in, we need German-speaking priest. Priest came over. The community started to grow. They built a larger church on the corner of William Street and what was then High Street, the outskirts of Newark, the very outskirts of it. And a couple of years, and it started to grow. In 1856, and what's going on in the United States today, it sort of harkens to what happened back then. In 1856, there was a meeting here in Newark of basically the Protestant associations. They were getting together to hold their annual event. I think it was a celebration of some historic date. They got, at that time, a lot of their feeling was anti-immigrant, anti-Catholic. So they came over from New York. There were thousands of them basically gathered here. They came off the train down in the center of Newark, paraded for a while, had some lunch, had a couple of things to drink, and then they were on their way. We're not really sure where they were going. We think maybe they were going to St. Patrick's Pro-Cathedral. But anyway, they were coming up William Street. They got to the corner of William and High, where St. Mary's Church was, and we don't really know what happened. Somebody threw a rock, somebody said something, it was a riot. They came in, they basically destroyed the church. The reports are in the New York Times. At that point, Bishop Bailey invited the head of the Benedictines to come back and say, look, I'll give you the parish. We will build a new church, and we need you guys to stay here. So that's 1856, right? So Seton Hall is just beginning at that same time. The head of the Benedictines, Boniface Wimmer, says, nice invitation, but you want us to put a monastery in the city. And to be honest, he says, I'm afraid of cities. Most monasteries are up on top of a hill somewhere out in the countryside. Bishop Bailey continues and eventually gets his way. So in 1857, they build a new church. The Benedictines agreed to take over. They build the monastery right next door there on High Street. And then in 1868, so that's about a dozen years after Seton Hall Prep and Seton Hall start, they open up a school for boys, which became St. Benedict's Prep. St. Benedict's Prep continues illustriously from 1868 through 1967, when we had the rebellion in Newark, which took place very close to the school. Within a few years after that, their traditional base had basically disappeared. The alumni were unwilling to send their sons back into Newark. And in 1972, at the end of the school year, the monks take a vote and they decide to close. They close the school for good. Half of the monks leave and they go out to Morristown. Remember, their fear of cities helped them create or look for a place outside the city, and they bought the property out in Morristown, which became what we know today as Del Barton. The monks who stayed took jobs. Part of every monastery is that they're supposed to be self-sustaining. So the school was their work. School is closed, so there's no money coming in. So they took jobs. One of them went to work at a drug rehab center. One went to work delivering paper bags. Whatever they could do it. But when they came back at the end of the day, they looked at each other and said, one, this is not what we signed up to do. Part of the Benedictine community is to live and work together. And second, who are we fooling? We're teachers. The community may have changed, but the need hasn't, and neither has our mission. So within a year of closing, they reimagined the school, reopened, in a basic form of what eventually became the St. Benedict's that exists today.
That's a fascinating history. I knew about the Newark uprising of the 20th century, but I did not know there was a religiously oriented one in the 19th century.
Absolutely.
Thank you for teaching me. Okay, let me take you a little bit forward in the questions. You were very clear that it's a Benedictine tradition. And so could you talk a little bit about the order and Benedictine values and traditions? What's the school bringing from that tradition to Newark?
Yep, absolutely. The Benedictines are the oldest monastic community in the church, 1,500 years. They go back to Monte Cassino in Italy, which is still a monastery on top of a hill today. Their motto is pray and work. Ora et labora. And as a community, that is what they do. So you may know Benedictine communities that bake bread and sell it. Benedictine communities that brew beer or whiskey. In Europe, that was a tradition for them. In the United States, in Newark, education was their business. Unlike the diocesan order of priests, Benedictines take similar vows of, in essence, poverty, chastity, and obedience They do it in slightly different wording. But uniquely, I found out, and I didn't realize this at the beginning, but it's a critical factor. They take a vow of stability, stability to the community. In essence, their handwritten vow that they sign on the day that they take their permanent solemn vows says that these promises are valid for the rest of my life. Poverty, chastity, obedience, and stability to the community, meaning the community where they've taken their vows. So when they take a vow in Newark, inside St. Mary's Church, which is connected to the monastery, they're basically saying, I will spend the rest of my life here. So they don't get transferred around from parish to parish. They stay there. That aspect of stability and loyalty to a community is really at the heart of what St. Benedict's does. And in some ways, it's what differentiates it, I think, in most cases from other educational institutions, because they really work on that from the very first day. A student, and I have to be careful now to say student, because since the COVID pandemic, 2020, they've had girls. So after 150 years of just boys, they now have boys and girls. It's coeducational, so they're not together. It's co-institutional, so they're not in the same class, but they're on the same property. From the very first day, either the boys or the girls show up. The aspect of building community is at the heart of what they do. So they start with a week. They call it the overnight, but it's overnight from Sunday afternoon until Friday afternoon. They leave the cell phones at home. Mom and dad can't call. Everybody is in there together, and they work on building community. And that process continues for the rest of the 4 years. The Benedictine approach also comes in that they have a very strict honor code. So the lockers in the school don't have locks. They are held to high academic standards. Cheating is not allowed, of course, but neither are you. You promise when you sign the honor code that if you know about cheating, you're obliged to tell. And they take that all very seriously. The community is reinforced every single morning at what they call convocation, which is not a homeroom gathering, but a gathering of the entire school. On Fridays, it's the gathering of the entire school, along with the girls' school, along with the middle division school. And they all come together. They share readings, Old Testament, New Testament. But after one of the student reads, there's a moment when anybody in the community can come up to say how it affected me. That, in essence, is repeating what they do inside the monastery every day. It's very much a schedule that's kept throughout the day, just the way the monks keep their own schedule, although it's not as rigorous. They're not getting the kids up at 5 o'clock in the morning, but the kids are expected to be there every day by 8 o'clock. When they take attendance, it's not just who's absent. They are taking an inventory of everyone. So you're expected to be there, and if you're not, someone has to find out where you are and report it. And they put a lot of that responsibility on the students themselves. So their belief is to never do anything for a student that a student could do for him or herself. And maybe the last thing I want to mention about the Benedictine values is in the Rule of St. Benedict's, which is also 1,500 years old, the very first line of it is one they take real seriously, even in the school, and it is, "Listen, my child, I want you to place the ear of your heart on the solid ground of the Master's wisdom." So they are asking you to open up, to sort of deal with each other, not just with what you hear. They also want you to basically keep quiet so you can listen to the other, but do it in an empathetic way. And they have not just a counselor, but a counseling center. And they've managed somehow to take away the stigma of going to counseling. So in that morning inventory, if someone happens to be in counseling, they simply say, "John is at counseling." And it's no different than if they said he was at the dentist office. They have counseling, individual counseling, and they also have group counseling where the students can decide on their own to come to counseling, to talk with each other about things that are going on, and they don't need their parents' permission to do that. And the groups are set up not just by your year, but you are drafted into a group, a smaller group within the school, and you stay in it for 4 years. So you've got young kids who are 14 years old in the same group with kids who've now been 4 years, and they're 18, and they're sort of teaching each other, and they work together in some competitive ways to build up that community.
There's so many interesting themes there. I want to ask follow-up. So I'll try only one follow-up. So the first sentence from the Rule of St. Benedict, it's got the ear metaphor that you described, but there's also the ground metaphor there, the solid ground of wisdom. And you mentioned the vow, that it's a commitment to place. Right. And on this ground is the head title for your book. Is that how it came together?
Yes.
Were you recognizing the resonance with the rule? It's such a strong contrast to like online education, right? Online education is virtual, place is irrelevant. There's still knowledge there, but it's not quite as bonded as what you're describing with a community that's committed to place for life, a long-term commitment.
Right. And I think the history of the monks, especially those who stayed, is an absolute concrete manifestation of that vow of stability. In 1972, if you could leave Newark, you did. They stayed put. They stayed loyal. And in terms of the resilience of a group of people who faced, they were ridiculous odds. A school closed, and a year later you want to reopen the same school in the same place. It didn't make any sense at all. And they went ahead and they did it, and they've managed to do it. Now there's a core group of people there, a core group of the monks who actually are alumni of St. Benedict's. And that's a big part of it. The headmaster, Father Ed, was a student, graduated in, I think, 1961 or 62, went right into the priesthood, and then at 26 years old was voted to be the director, then headmaster, of a school that didn't exist. Today, he's still the headmaster. 53 years later, he's still the headmaster, and the core group of the monks who were students at the time are still there.
That's a beautiful ethic of commitment and care. Thank you so much. I'm going to move us ahead a little bit. You mentioned that the self-sustaining value of Benedictine communities means that they have some kind of business, something to keep their community going. And in comparison to some of the European traditions you mentioned, like running a school sounds hard, and brewing beer sounds relatively easy and constrained. So you might have time for meditation and prayer if you're brewing beer, especially with a large community where you can share the jobs around. But a special prep school like St. Benedict's, it's a very challenging task with hundreds of kids. It can, I would think, dominate the monk's time and maybe intrude onto some prayer. You were there for 2 years to write this book. What did you find out about how they balance spiritual life with work life?
Yeah, that's a very perceptive question, and one that often is overlooked because St. Benedict's model has become so successful. The school itself has been successful. But I was able to find a document that was actually put together by some of the monks who objected to this very thing within the community itself. And they said the more we go into the school, the less time there is for the meditative life that many of us selected. So I think what happens is that core group of monks who were alums. And that's a long tradition at St. Benedict's, the old St. Benedict's before 1972. It was basically a pipeline for new recruits, new vocations. And you'd often get 2 or 3 from a class go right into it. Well, they admired the monks. They saw them living there. They liked what they were doing, and they would go right into it. Though that group of people who are still there, and there's, I think, about 6 of them, I don't think they feel this tension so much. They remember, the monk's life is very ordered. They have a schedule that they keep every day, starting very early in the morning, going until early evening, and then it's basically lights out. So they and their commute is very short. They go out one door and into the other door. Since the school reopened in 1973, among the monks who are there now, and there's about 15, there's only one who is a post-1972 graduate. So that whole equation has changed. Of course, today, the majority of the students are not Catholic and would not be even in a position to consider becoming a monk. The girls obviously can't either. And the life of a monastic is, well, it has different allures today than it did then. So the people, there's that group of 6, but there are, as I mentioned, maybe 15 monks. And so many of them came from outside. And those who came from outside came in with the understanding that the school was going to be a big part of what you do. But increasingly, as time went on, even during my time there were fewer and fewer monks in the classroom. And many of the newer ones who came in during that period of time after 1973 either made it clear that they were not that interested in the school or have simply aged out of it. They still continue to get recruits. In the time that I was working on the book, they had 4 young men vow to spend the rest of their lives in Newark, which is pretty incredible, I thought. And at one point, there was a funeral for the oldest monk, who was in his 90s. And I attended the funeral service and the burial, and there was one of these young monks there. And I watched him during it, and I asked him afterwards, how does it feel to think that you're now in your 20s, but your whole life is going to be here, and your eventual place is right there? And so I should have expected it, but at that point, at least, he said, it's comforting. In these days when so much is uncertain and there are so many things that can happen, the idea of sort of knowing what your trajectory is, having that settled, was comforting for him. So this report that was done was pretty critical of the emphasis on the school. And the school, as the school has gotten bigger, the demands have gotten greater. There were some words back and forth. Some of it is pretty harsh, I thought. But when I talked to the monks who were still there, who saw it, they said, well, that's one person's view, but we've got our way of doing it. And they seem to have reached a pretty easy balance between prayer and work. And some of the work is not in the school.
Well, it's a vivid description, especially the funeral story. And then for the statistic, I was headed there, so thank you for informing me. The vocations are still coming in. People are still committing to this wonderful school.
They commit to the monastery.
To the monastery,
community.
Yeah, to the community, to the abbey. Let me talk a little bit about some geography for a minute. So there's about 12 acres that are the abbey, and it's right in downtown Newark. Like many Catholic structures, it's got walls around it. And so in your book, you explain how the monks contend that the barriers are there to mark off the area as special and even sacred.
Even sacred.
But is it really possible to be set off from the rest of the city without the walls becoming defensive ramparts?
Yeah. You might, well, you'd have to see them. These are not castle-like walls there. And they aren't all that effective. They've had break-ins. One of the episodes that I report in the book, which led up, I think, in large measure to their vote to leave in 1972, was one of the priests who's still there was walking down the hall one day and came across a guy carrying a TV. And of course, he knew what was up, and they chased each other, and he ended up getting whacked on the head with a hammer. After that, some of the monks, and as I read the archives and the reports of their meetings, said, let's get out of here before we all get killed. So the walls are symbolic more than they are protective. But, fences separate, but they also connect. And so much of the school so much of the city is brought into the school every day. Remember, these are kids who live in the heart of the city, who have the city all over them, in the way they speak, in the way they dress, in their attitudes, in the families and the homes that they left behind. And the monks are very much about accepting all that. One of the things I heard him say most often to the kids is, your history is not a mistake. You are who you are. And all of that happened is part of who you are. And you're not bound by that, but that is a part of you. So the counseling that they do very often deals with all of that. They have an extraordinary event at the end of the year that they call Stage Rage. And what they do is they have a group of about a dozen kids who basically, I watch this, go on stage and recount in a dramatic fashion the worst moments of their lives in front of the entire school. It said so many things to me about their attitude toward counseling and what they've managed to do in terms of dealing with these deepest traumas that these kids come with that you can't deal with in an algebra class, or you can't have an algebra class that you're trying to teach them equations if you haven't dealt with that. And so the school is in the city, and the city is in the school, very much so, despite the fence.
Thank you for explaining. I'm going to take us into our last question now. It's a little bit more about you and your work and a little bit less about the school itself. It really, well, first off, I mean, congratulations on landing a major publisher like HarperCollins. But, after Spotlight and other abuse crises, it's got to be really tough to get a publisher, a big publisher, to agree to work with an author who wants to write a book about Catholic priests. Can you describe how the business side of things came about for this project?
Yeah, it was. First of all, this is a book I've been trying to write for 20 years. First, I had to get past the monks. And the first effort back in 2002 was almost successful, and then it got undercut by the then abbot, who simply refused. The monks voted for it. The abbot voted against it. By 2022, there was a new abbot. So I tried again. And this time, I got a more positive response. So as I started putting the story together, as a writer, I was trying to, it's a big, sprawling story. How do you tell that story and keep people's interest? So you try to do it with a central character. It would be ideal. And I thought the central character here was Father Ed, who is, as a student, as an alum, as a priest, as the headmaster, and as the headmaster still, could tell the whole story. I wasn't interested so much in going back to 1850, right? This was going to be a story from the new school. So that was my proposal. My original proposal was that. My agent looked at it and said, I can't do this. No one will buy a book about a white priest in a black community. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, it will come across as white savior. That was the term that they used, white savior. I said, well, I think you're misreading it. They didn't come in from anywhere. They were there before the community changed. But the anti-Catholic, anti-priest, pedophilia, all of that came in to play here. And so I had to restructure the proposal and turn it around to be more on the students. But there are no students from 1973 on because they're long gone. So how do I tell the story without switching it all up? I felt that the period from the riot to the closing was important to understand what they did and what it means to be there. I was fortunate enough at one of these convocations early on in Father Ed was leading it, and he called, they sometimes have alumni who come back, and he called one of these alums up to speak to the kids. And it turned out he was a black kid from Newark who was enticed to come to St. Benedict's in that very first year when it was reopened. And the only reason this kid was at St. Benedict's was because he played in a CYO basketball league. And the gym was open because the school was closed. That young man, now a retired adult, is the freshman basketball coach at St. Benedict's. And his story, so much of his story is wrapped up in the history of the school and the history of Newark, because his family came from the South in the Great Migration and ended up in Newark at a time when there were so many black families, which changed the history of Newark, which changed it has changed everything. And he was there. As a young child, he remembers, and this is the opening of the book, he remembers being told by his mother to stay away from the window. So, of course, he went to the window, peeked out, and saw a tank and then Jeeps coming down his street. And, of course, that was 1967. He lived at the time at the end of Springfield Avenue, and the riots basically incinerated Springfield Avenue from St. Benedict's and now King Boulevard up to his house. So when he was a student just a few years later, he had to walk down that entire path of destruction and then back later. So I end the book with Coach Badger and I walking the same path, going back to the house from St. Benedict's. So it was, even the cover of the book became an issue because the publisher did not want, this is the cloister inside the property there. This is on the side of their meeting room. It's a circular meeting room. And I simply took this picture, and when they first showed me the cover, it was gone. I said, what happened? And they thought it tilted the story, it might tilt the story too much toward Catholic, and then that would, I said, well, it's got to, if you're going to use that, it's got to be there. I insisted, and there it is. So it was tough, and even now, as it's ready to come out, some of that same sentiment is still very much there. And I had to do a lot of due diligence to check to make sure none of those issues touched these guys.
Well, congratulations on winning the cover battle. I mean, it's on this ground. It's about space and architecture. To not have an image is a troubling one. So I'm glad that worked out for you. Well, so we're just out of time. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
My name again is John Radwan, and Anthony DePalma's new book is called On This Ground: Hardship and Hope at America's Toughest Prep School. It'll be published next month, February 2026, by HarperCollins. I encourage you all to check it out. And please also check out our other podcasts from Seton Hall's Institute for Communication and Religion. They're all available on the Podbean platform. It's just our name, all one word, Institute for Communication and Religion, no spaces, .podbean.com. And then, of course, I also invite you to check out our many other news stories and projects at our webpage, shu.edu/communication-religion. So on behalf of the ICR, thank you all for listening. Thank you, Anthony DePalma, and I wish everybody a beautiful day. Bye-bye.